Believing that the demons would surely have to pause along the way at some point, the Night Elves truly thought they'd be able to regroup once their retreat had reached Suramar, absolutely certain that if all else failed, Blackrock Hold would be their sanctuary. And they couldn't have been more wrong if they tried. Ronin and Krasis had known this, long before Lord Ravencrest or any of the others did. They'd seen the work of Archimonde before.
He'll give us no respite.
Krasis absently touched Coriel Strauss's scale, fused to his chest, just to remind everyone in the audience of that plot point.
He'll run the demons into the ground before letting us escape, and we'll all collapse of exhaustion long before they ever do.
Failing to stop the rout at Suramar, the Hold had been the retreating force's next stop. Unfortunately, Ravencrest's fortress wasn't even large enough to hold the population of the local area, much less the giant force the Night Elven commander had gathered.
Never would I have thought the Hold would be so useless. Our force is too great despite our losses, and if we sit here, the demons will chop away at those left outside and then starve those within. Surely we can survive a siege? Against others, aye, but these enemies will not tire and leave. They'll destroy all around us and then wait for the inevitable. No, I will not let our end be so ignoble.
So, with a heavy heart, they abandoned the place, and the city of Suramar, knowing that city was now well and truly lost, according to this book, which was written well before the Legion expansion ever came out. And I quote, "Even before the last glimpse of the city dwindled in the distance, the defenders could see the massive trees toppling, the walls collapsing under the relentless onslaught." Which doesn't necessarily contradict what we've seen since, but they did fail to see the giant magical bubble forming around the city, apparently. But day faded into night, night into day, and still Ravencrest's force was pushed back, and back, and back. Obviously, some of the demon horde had branched off, and were now taking part in sacking Suramar, but that didn't make things any easier. Especially since the population of elven refugees amongst the retreating force was growing with each hour. The civilians picked up along the way lacked the coordination and stamina of the fighters. Generations of peace had left them completely unprepared for all of this, so they were kind of just getting in the way a lot.
Move on. You can't just keep stopping in the middle of this. Keep going.
Krasis frowned at Jared Shadowsong's rather meta commentary. Guy would be very good at cinema sins, I guess.
This will only worsen. If the refugees and soldiers become too entangled, Ravencrest will struggle to maintain order. This is exactly what Archimonde desires. But what can we do?
There were full-blown bags under Ronin's eyes. He looked absolutely buggered. In fact, the only one of them that appeared to have anything left was Brox, who had grown up in wartime, but even he looked like he wouldn't say no to a nap. However, as if in direct answer to Ronin's question of what can we do, the brutish orc suddenly pushed past Captain Shadowsong, approached a large group of clueless refugees, and started barking instructions, pointing and herding them in a particular direction, inspiring Jared to follow his example, spread his guard unit wide and take the initiative, also instructing civilians. Soon enough, order was re-established a little bit, and the host's pace actually quickened as well, so good job, Broxigar. But as the Burning Legion drove the elven force ever on, Krasis soon noticed a mountain in the distance, one that struck a vague recollection.
Captain Shadowsong, is there a name to that dire peak? Aye, Master Krasis. It's Mount Hygel.
Krasis' lips then pursed.
Mount Hygel. Are we truly driven back so far as that?
Ronin noted the Pale Mage's expression, so he leaned in.
You got memories stirring or something? That or common sense? Whichever the case, we cannot permit this retreat to go on much farther. The host must make a stand, Ronin. If we fall back beyond Mount Hygel, then all is lost. The Lord Ravencrest has already done all he can, and we've worn ourselves out just buying time. Then we must do more. Would that I could find Malfurion. His skill would be one needed now. I last saw him with the priestess. He looked as pale as one of his kind could get. Battled something out there that nearly destroyed him by the looks of it. Yes, and I think it was Archimonde. If it were Archimonde, then Malfurion would be dead, Krasis. No, and that is exactly why I wish he were here. Nonetheless, with or without him, we must take the offensive and begin our assault anew.
Meanwhile, in a different place, almost all of the greatest of the dragons gathered within the Chamber of the Aspects. Nozdormu was still very much absent, but bronze dragonflight representatives, consorts of each flight, Alexstrasza, Neltharion, Ysera and Malygos were all present. All the important folk. The NPC dragons had already given of themselves off-screen, but the process of the aspects giving a little bit of their power to Neltharion's disc required a touch more delicacy, and ceremony, and exposition. The Earthwarder's 3 mates stood behind the Black Behemoth, dwarfed in size by him and yet significantly larger than our POV character for this section, Corielstras. As he studied them, Alexstras's youngest consort noted that they seemed like literal shadows of their mate, every movement based solely upon whatever Neltharion did or said, which was ever so slightly disturbing. Kinda made Corielstras feel a bit gross, actually. Made even worse by the fact that no one else seemed to be noticing this massive red flag. Glancing away and toward the emerald males didn't help much. Isira's mates were also unsettling, slim, almost ghostly, and just as their mistress, their eyes were constantly closed, eyeballs themselves shifting side to side beneath the lids, existing in 2 planes, here and the Emerald Dream. They were silent and still, but Corielstras could still feel their magical senses monitoring the situation closely. Next, it was Malygos and his mates' turn to be observed. Interestingly enough, they were almost the exact opposite of the Greens, moving and shifting constantly, nudging each other, fidgeting, looking here, there and everywhere like a bunch of crazies. Even their scales glittered in merry little displays of magic. A much more refreshing sight, Corielstras thought to himself, than those last 2 groups of weirdos that he looked at. And then there were Nosdormu's 4 consorts. The same sandy bronze texture as their mate, but much more solid than the almost fluid monarch of time. Where the bloody hell had he gone, anyway? According to Alexstrasza, even these 4 consorts had no idea where he'd buggered off to. Yet, the timeless one was still here in essence. The oldest of the females held what appeared to be an hourglass, one which held glittering bronze sands floating up, and then down, and then up again. A part of Nosdormu himself, set aside for urgent need. Each of the aspects had some part of their essence put aside, for they represented the very fabric of the world, and its most powerful forces, created by the Titans themselves. So it was probably a good idea to have at least a part of them available just in case at all times. Anyway, whilst all of those paragraphs were going on, the various flights had been alternating their offerings, one at a time, and now only 2 remained. The previously aforementioned essence of Nosdormu, and Corielstras. For some reason, the young consort did not feel quite as honoured as he probably should. But before he could let anyone know that, the Timeless One's prime mate, Saradormi, carried the hourglass forward towards the Dragon Soul, Neltharion's creation floating in the air, radiating a fearsome yet majestic glow. I come bearing representation of he who is without end, he who sees past, present, and future. In his name, I add his strength, power, and self to this weapon. With one single squeeze from her powerful paw, Saradormi then broke the hourglass, the sand within swirling out as if alive and sentient, sprinkling itself onto Neltharion's disc, and then vanishing with a poof. My love. Alexstrasza's urging whisper accompanied a gentle nudge, and still feeling like this was definitely a bad idea, Corielstras strode forward. His queen had asked this boon of him and all the others. How could he be the only one to say no to her? But, nevertheless, as he neared the artifact, he stared at it, seeing not the salvation of the world, but something that tainted it. But that was stupid, surely. Why would the Earthwarder do such a heinous thing?
It is waiting for you.
The Red Dragon looked up into the huge visage of Neltharion, who stared back without so much as a blink, his breathing rapid, growing more and more frenzied with each passing second that Corielstras hesitated. So many alarm bells. And yet, Malygos, Isira, Alexstrasza had all willingly given of themselves. In fact, Malygos had been the first to do it. If the Master of Magic trusted the work of Neltharion, then who was Corielstras to say otherwise? And so, the young Red opened himself up to the Dragon Soul. The disc flared with daunting illumination as it reached inside Corielstras, extracting that which it desired, absorbing his essence and adding it to all the others. And with that over and done with, Neltharion snatched up the artifact covetously.
It is done. All have given that which must be given. I now seal the Dragon Soul forever, so that which has been attained shall never be lost.
Shutting his eyes momentarily, Neltharion's body took on a dark aura, one which flowed from him to the tiny but mighty talisman in his grasp, and for a brief but rather telling moment, the Dragon Soul burned as black as its creator. Should that be? Asked Isira, quietly.
For it to be as it must, yes.
It is a weapon like no other. It must be like no other,
added Malygos, sort of confidently, and the Earthwarder nodded appreciatively for his friend's word of affirmation.
The final casting will take time. It has to be taken from here to a place of silence and privacy.
How long?
It will be ready when it's ready.
And with that, snooty Neltharion spread his wings and buggered off, his three mates following perfectly, like puppets. And as his gaze watched the departing behemoths, Carielstra's thoughts reflected on what the bloody hell had just happened. That tiny golden disc had incredible power. That much was certain. He'd felt it, whilst it was glowing at him and fingering his insides. Meanwhile again, in the previous place, before that other place, Malfurion dreamed. He dreamed that he and Tyrande lived in a beautiful treehouse, covered in flowers, with a nice carpet or something. In the dream, Tyrande played a silver lyre, whilst their children, a boy and a girl, darted about giggling and frolicking and cavorting and stuff. And Malfurion sat by the window, breathing in the fresh air and savouring his life proudly. The world was at peace. Everything was brilliant. It was the best of times. But a violent tremor then suddenly shook the tree. Surrounding homes and structures of Suramar started to tumble and collapse, whilst people outside screamed and fires blazed. Where are the children? Oh no, they're gone. This is the worst of times. And yet, Tyrande still sat strumming her lyre like some kind of sociopath. Tyrande! Quickly! She ignores him, blithely caught up in her music, the cow. The treehouse itself then tipped, with Malfurion trying to use his druidic powers to keep it from collapsing entirely. But nothing happened. The tree and the flora covering it felt dead to Malfurion's senses. However, as the tree finally fell, Tyrande woke from her apathetic stupor, screaming and reaching out for Malfurion. The distance, though, was too great, so she just slipped from the branch instead, only to land in the arms of Illidan, who smiled magnanimously before starting to smugly fly away with his catch. Illidan, come back with my wife! Illidan paused mid-air and turned back to his brother, and then laughed like a twat. And as he cackled away, his form started to shift, twisting and growing, contorting, a now giant and clawed hand shaking Tyrande's limp body like a rag doll. All the young druid could do was stand and stare in horror at the sight of Archimonde, now standing where his brother had been. Oh!
Hush, Malfurion. Be careful.
Tyrande's voice calmed Malfurion somewhat, bringing him back to clear consciousness.
I dreamt. I dreamt.
Malfurion cut himself off. Parts of that dream had been a little bit too personal. He wasn't about to embarrass himself.
I know. I heard you speak. I thought I heard my name. And Illidan's. Yes.
When Malfurion didn't say anything more than that, Tyrande just touched his cheek gently.
It must have been a terrible dream, Malfurion. But at least you finally slept.
Again, noticing the very close proximity of her boobs, the young druid straightened, looking around and noticing for the first time a sea of figures surrounding them. Civilians, many of which looked utterly confused and bewildered.
Where are we? Near Mount Hyjal. So far? That can't be. I'm afraid it is.
Balls. So, after all of their efforts, the Night Elves were still doomed. If the demons had driven them back this far, how could they possibly hope to recover?
Elune watches over us. She'll give us some reprieve, I'm certain. I hope so. Where are the others? Your brother is with the Moonguard. I've not seen Krasis or the others.
It was not Illidan that Malfurion currently wanted to see. After his confrontation with Archimonde, the young druid wished to speak to the wizards. They had to be warned of the powerful demon commander.
Tyrande, I have to find the outsiders. I believe they are still the key to our survival. You'll never make it on foot. You're still weak. Take my lightsaber.
The last thing Malfurion wanted to do was make Tyrande sacrifice her own mount for a possibly futile search, but she then gave him a look. A steadfast, determined one. One that said, "Shut your stupid face and take my mount." So, Malfurion did as he was told, hurrying off atop the lightsaber, vowing to himself that he would not fail Tyrande's trust. He would find them. But, with so many additional refugees now added to the host, finding three unique figures such as an orc, a human, and a Krasis was actually a lot more difficult than you'd think. Especially since Malfurion swept his gaze over the crowds dozens of times before realising that he could just make use of his druid skills. So, he shut his eyes and reached out with his senses, touching the minds of the many other Nightsabers throughout the surrounding area, speaking to them as he had the many beasts of the forests during his lessons with Cenarius. In a nutshell, he asked cats if they'd smelled any strangers recently. When that didn't work, Malfurion stretched his senses slightly further, asking some of the many pets being carried by refugees. And eventually, after a lot of faffing about, a dark panther was like, "Yeah, I seen him." Meow. The panther had seen Brox, about an hour or two earlier. Veering his mount in the correct direction, Malfurion continued to ask other animals along the way, discovering reports of sightings of Ronin and Krasis as well. Something about Krasis in particular stood out within the different creatures' minds. They almost revered him, showing him a respect that predators often only reserved for far superior beings. Yet another of the many mounting mysteries surrounding that not-quite-right elven mage, Malfurion thought. However, as he approached where the outsiders had to be, the sound of battle rose in the distance, with the young druid noting that the soldiers here appeared much more wary and exhausted. Almost as if they'd just come directly from the front lines or something. "What are you doing here? All non-combatants to the head of the flow. Be gone with you."
He's supposed to be up here, Captain. That should be clear by just a look at his face.
Malfurion glanced over his shoulder to see his brother approaching.
Illidan, I thought you lost, brother. What happened to you? Someone said they saw you struck down. I was saved. Duranda brought me to safety.
Illidan's dumb grin remained, but the humour in his eyes suddenly drifted away.
Did she? I'm glad that she was so close to you. Illidan, it's good that you're here. The old wizard's been trying to organize something. Seems to think you're important. Krasis, where is he? Why, just where you're heading, brother. Up at the very edge of the fight. Where is Illidan? The Moonguard refuses to act without him, save to shield themselves. He said he was coming. Needed to speak with Ravencrest first or something. Well, I wish he'd hurry the f*** up. Stop worrying about credit and praise.
Ronin couldn't argue with that. Illidan was so much the opposite of his druid brother. Ambitious, wild, and oblivious of the risk to others. At least 3 of the Moonguard were now straight up crippled from feeding Illidan their power, and yet, despite his reckless use of them, the rest of the Moonguard appear to have bound themselves to him regardless, refusing to follow the lead of anyone else.
What the bloody hell is that?
Something which can only be described as a floating mushroom made of mist suddenly descended upon a line of soldiers up ahead, and before any of the spellcasters could act, several of the soldiers' faces suddenly swelled up with red burning pustules, and they exploded.
That was disgusting. We can't wait any longer. If the Moonguard will not follow our lead, then we must hope we can do something by ourselves.
However, just as the wizards prepared to do just that, some hope arrived.
Illidan, Malfurion, nice of you to finally join us. You're late. Gather the Moonguard. We must be ready to follow my lead.
From many others, Illidan would likely not have taken such a brusque command, but he had a healthy respect for both of these wizards, especially Ronin. So, he nodded and hurried to obey.
What do you hope to do? The demons must be stopped here. It is vital that we not be pushed back beyond Mount Hydril. We must turn this route into an aggressive attack.
Malfurion nodded.
Archimond is out there. I barely escaped him. I had suspected as much. The fact that you lived through an encounter with him says that I was correct in desiring your presence at this moment. But what can I do? What you've been trained to do, naturally.
Krasis then turned to Ronin.
In matters of magic, Illidan looks to you more than anyone. I leave it to you to establish a link with him. As you wish. And Malfurion, imagine the most powerful spell you think you can cast. By all means, do not tell me what it is. Use whatever method, whatever contact with the powers of the world that you require. But do not finish your casting until I say so. We must be relentless against our foes. I understand. Good. Then we begin. Follow my lead.
Krasis' eyes then widened suddenly.
Oh, one more detail, Malfurion. Be prepared to randomly shift the focus of your attack. Move your spell to where it seems there's a gap in our effort. Do you understand? I believe so. May the powers of light be with us then.
Several more false starts and lines of just standing there doing nothing then occur in the book before Krasis finally snaps his eyes open and says go. And without any knowledge of each other's planned attacks, they all then sprang into action. Exactly how Krasis had intended it. He desired true random effort, for some reason. Apparently that was the best way to foul up whatever defences Archimond and his demons might have devised. In summary, spears of ice suddenly fell from the clouds. To the north, the ground shook as the earth itself swelled. Elsewhere, huge birds appeared, attacking the airborne elements of the Legion. One spell after another assaulted the enemies, each completely random and different from the last. And just as the demons managed to regain their bearings and attempt to counter, Graces then yelled, "Shift your focus!" So, Malfurion, Ronin, Illidan and his Moonguard did just that, switching the targets and direction of their spells, confusing warlocks and demons alike.
They're stalled! Shift focus again, and push harder! We must retake ground!
Again, the location and direction of attacks was adjusted.
Ronin! It's time!
Malfurion quickly sidled up to Ronin.
What's he talking about? It took some convincing, but Shadowsong rode to Ravencrest. He's been waiting for our signal. For what?
In answer, battle horns then sounded, and the entire Night Elven host then surged forward, crashing into the demon army hard and fast. And as a result, the Burning Legion began to retreat.
Ravencrest must follow the plan. They cannot chase the Legion too far or too fast.
Arrows whistled through the air, slaying scores of demons, as Panther Riders charged, their mounts ripping and shredding.
We're actually doing it! Do not let up!
Good news, the Night Elves did not let up. Exhausted as they might be, they all understood well that this was a most critical juncture, and again did not need Krasis to say it out loud. The Sisterhood of Elune, resplendent in their battle armor, then strengthened the fighters further, their singing literally feeding the warriors, as if the moon herself now hung over the host. Yard by yard, the Night Elves pushed, demons falling with each step.
Now! Strike the Eridar!
Every spellcaster then focused their efforts on the airborne warlocks, with thunder and lightning ravaging the sky. And it wasn't long at all before they too started to pull back.
We should keep after them,
Malfurion yelled enthusiastically.
Push them through the portal and back to their hellish domain!
That outburst made Krasis chuckle audibly, an unusual sight that caused even Ronin to be a little bit startled.
Sound more like your brother than you, Malfurion. Let not the euphoria of the moment take you too far. This host would not survive a pitched battle all the way back to Zinashari. We're running on fumes alone. Then, what was the point in all this? Look around you, young Night Elf. Your people survive. That is more than they thought possible only an hour ago. Will Ravencrest follow your instructions, though?
Asked Ronin, gesturing toward the noble's banner.
I believe he will. Look.
Krasis pointed to the north. The advance was already starting to slow. The soldiers ahead seemed more interested in securing the ground they'd gained, rather than taking more. And after another few moments, the front line had completely halted, with Krasis breathing a sigh of relief.
Praise the aspects. We've done it. Stop them from pushing us back beyond the mountain. Yes. Now the difficult part begins.